This is an account of what's going on my phone. The interference and the near constant coercive control over my devices and my accounts, along with fraud, identity fraud, and criminal activity, opening multiple accounts using my credentials and posting or streaming illegal content, getting my name and my credentials banned from multiple different social media platforms. So I know there's a pretty concerted effort to make me out to sound crazy or paranoid. And when I'm feeling vulnerable, I can understand how someone without all the information might perceive me as someone who might be confused. But without being given a chance to explain the details, show the evidence, and talk to someone who actually has the education and credentials to understand the level of interference that I'm having, there's really no way for me to break that barrier of perception of just calling me crazy. I will just start off by giving some stats about paranoia, psychosis, schizophrenia. Only 0.33% of our national population has a diagnosis of schizophrenia or paranoia. Women are only about 15% of that population. Sorry, it might be anywhere from 15 to 25%. And women in their 30s and 40s suddenly having a paranoid psychosis break is such a small, minute number. It would have to be induced by a severe amount of psychotic drugs. I mean, like things like acid, things like MDMA, things that make the mind completely altered. I do not have a history of paranoia. I don't have a history of schizophrenia. This is all propaganda to discredit me and make sure that the truth of my experience and the crimes that happened to me and my children are not heard, and that I'm never in a position where I can even be, where I can even tell my story or voice what's the facts around my case in the first place. So by recording the case details, giving a brief history of the abusive litigation that I endured for trying to fight for my kids and continually bringing evidence. In fact, I've done nothing but reproduce the records, multiple documents, multiple witnesses, lots and lots of compounded evidence over the course of, 7 years straight. That was just completely ignored in the face of horrendous smears, a near constant spinning campaign of accusations of false diagnoses, which have never been substantiated by any doctor, by any professional, and in fact, being repeatedly subject to abusive litigation in that I've had to undergo multiple mental health evaluations because my evaluations never met the outcome that the other party and the people that he was in cahoots with or were co-conspiring to make sure that I was silenced, which includes lawyers, judges, court personnel, CPS. The results of, I think, 8 mental health evaluations over the course of 5 years, always supporting me, supporting the facts, supporting nothing but the truth, was ignored. So, enduring a near constant rotation of literally every diagnosis out there, having been subject to my back against the wall, where if I told the truth, I would then get if I said anything to anyone about my children and the state that they were in, just the facts, and it somehow got to a professional and was reported to CPS, I would then get a restraining order filed against me. I believe there was 12 in 1 year. 80% of them were denied, but just about every 3 months I had a restraining order filed against me. Everything from, all the diagnoses to more or less moms falsely accusing dad. Accusations would have to encompass me saying that someone is guilty of something, when I have been very straightforward about simply relaying the facts. What, where, when, why, who, measurable proof, where it was recorded, who saw it, what happened. That is not an accusation. That is merely being a voice for my children when they did not have a voice of their own. Producing evidence of ongoing injuries, of medical records, having witnesses support what they saw in my children, never amounted to anything, because it turned out that what we're seeing now, and what a lot of protective parents are seeing, the judges in our family court case were simply bought out. They simply did not have to substantiate or even acknowledge any of the evidence, any of the records. They did not even have to acknowledge the fact that nearly 100 reports were made to CPS against my children's father, over the course of a year. They didn't have to acknowledge that one of my sons, they're twins, had 4 black eyes in 1 year. 3 of them were in the first 3 months of their kindergarten year. They didn't have to acknowledge that in that same year, that same child weighed 36 pounds or 38 pounds going into kindergarten and left kindergarten at 36 pounds, the weight of a 3-year-old. They didn't have to acknowledge that he was chronically sick to the point where he would have 103-degree temperatures and profusely throw up. He was diagnosed with asthma, something that I had no part in, that I was repeatedly blamed as I was constantly being called Munchausen's. This was a diagnosis that was given to my son after I took him to the hospital because he had a 103-degree temperature and he was profusely throwing up and he was breathing in a way where he could not get his breath. He was sick every other month, every other time that I saw him. This is in his kindergarten year. He was also told that I was poisoning him when I tried to give him Tylenol to reduce his fever. He was told so much that he refused to drink water. He was told by his father that I was putting poison in his water, so he refused to drink water. And after he was diagnosed with a virus, on one of the times that he was sick, we had gone to the hospital, we had gone to the doctor to have both of the twins' shoulders checked out because they came to school with pretty severe injuries, both of them, to their shoulders, both with different stories. That same doctor's appointment, my son was very ill, very sick, and was refusing to drink any liquids because his father was, as I said, telling him that I was poisoning him. His father then allowed him to go to school the next day. He still was not eating and wasn't drinking water. He ended up passing out at school. Their father led the school to believe that I had poisoned my son, and so the police and the EMTs came, and he was rushed to Children's Hospital, where they did a tox screen. Never did their father mention that he had a flu, that he was seen, and he was diagnosed with the virus. Never did he mention that he sent him to school with a temperature. Never did he mention that he was repeatedly telling my son that he was being poisoned by me. Now, there are medical records. Some of these records were put in our file, in our court file. The other twin, that same year, had daily breakdowns, got in repeated physical fights with other children, threatened to kill children, choked out other children, and also had multiple injuries to his face that were seen and documented. This is all in their kindergarten year. The boys missed 25 days of school their kindergarten year. Their father, with all of this knowledge, their father was allowed to move them across the country, not meeting a single statute. To relocate a child away from one of their parents, you have to meet 7 statutes, all 7 of them. He did not meet a single statute. He was allowed to move these boys with all of what was just acknowledged, all of these things documented. That's 1 year's example of 6 years of nonstop litigation where I endured, there's a legal term for it, but it's abusive litigation, where I was constantly accused, and there was a constant filings against me where it drained me, and all I had the means to do was defend myself. Whenever it came to the opportunity to present the evidence, it simply just was not acknowledged by the judge. The judge did not have to even point towards the information. He simply just didn't have to acknowledge it. There's no jury. These children have been profoundly abused in front of everyone. And so many people had the opportunity to fight for them. And they were failed repeatedly over and over again. I had my children taken from me for simply relaying the same details, different year of my children enduring horrific abuse, leaving my home under my care. They were in my full-time care for the first 4 years of their life. They would leave to see their father for 8 hours on Sunday. They would leave. They have a baseline of pretty normal kids. They're not too wild. They don't get too upset. They're happy, pretty mild, sweet little boys. They would leave my care. Witnesses always being around us, and they would come home flatlined with huge dark circles under their eyes and multiple bruising patterns around their waist, collarbone, jaws. A pattern of bruising that indicated restraint. In fact, these bruises were all every single one of these injuries, mind you, this was every 5 weeks they would come home with the same pattern of bruises. All of the bruises met the criteria of the Children's Hospital ED list for indicating of child abuse. The bruises were the size and shape of adult handprints. In addition to these bruising patterns, and I had dozens, probably a total of 100 pictures of these bruises on my children. In addition, my children had multiple chronic injuries and pain in their rectum, multiple and chronic injuries and chafing to their penises. When the twin that would get chronically sick, the smaller one, when he was 5 years old, he had a sore on his penis that would get so bloody that he said that he didn't know if his penis was falling off. This was after my sons were taken from me. This was after they had reported that their daddy hurt them in the bottom and then poured daddy juice on them. One of them reported. The other reported, "Daddy hurts me and I'm not supposed to tell." These were reported to the police, the would-be police, you guys, in 2019 and 20. When the smaller twin was 5, he had a chronic sore in his penis for 5 months. I repeatedly tried to get medical help, letting the family court know that he needed medical care. When I was able to take him to a walk-in clinic in Everett, he was diagnosed with E. coli, which on the penis, creating a sore, a chronic sore, is a result of male-on-male sexual activity. There's no other cause for it. Those results were submitted into our family court documents. Instead of acknowledging the medical indications, I was repeatedly regarded as a pervert. Their father said I was obsessed with their penises. I was made out to be a hysterical mother who was projecting her own trauma onto her children. Now, if you're someone who has any education in trauma-informed care, you'll know that people who treat their trauma, who do therapy and essentially heal their trauma, because trauma is healable, very rarely will they project onto anyone. In fact, they're more capable, they're more credible to see the indications of abuse in others because they have integrated their trauma and their memories so that it is not that is not in the subconscious brain and being projected out or confusing any of the present reality. I had spent years before having my children doing trauma therapy. I had PTSD that was in regression, or not regression. I basically don't have PTSD anymore for my childhood trauma because I had faced the trauma, which is something that you can do in therapy. You pull up the core memories, you process them, you grieve them, and then you sort them away. They no longer trigger you in everyday life experiences. So I would say that a decade of this form of therapy would equip me to be able to visibly acknowledge that my sons are experiencing something that is notable, measurable, and in no other terms would make any other sense than what the fucking evidence, excuse me, my language, indicated. Instead of my voice being heard in this context, because this is how I speak, and I'm quite nervous speaking, all of the projections and the hearsay and this fabricated trope of a person replaced who I was. So I was never, not only was I never heard or seen, everything that I was doing to protect my children was simply ignored and overshadowed by a campaign that seemed to me to have been designed long before I came along. By year 6 of the nonstop litigation, I was put in a position where if I said anything to a doctor about the repeated abuse my children were suffering, and it got to a CPS agent, I would be subject to having my children withheld from me illegally and without any consequence for months at a time. My rights would be stripped, and I would have to jump through more hoops and go through more evaluations. If I didn't say anything, I would be put in a position where their father would immediately try to suggest and implicate that the signs my sons were exhibiting were a result of abuse that I had committed. And this can be seen in the transcripts in our court files. I appealed our first trial, and by the fact that I have a below poverty line income, I would be granted the transcripts without any question. But the Supreme Court granted me the transcripts in my appeal, and the lower court, family court, denied me my transcripts for absolutely no reason. So I couldn't appeal the first trial that happened in 2021, December 2021. The transcripts outlined the cross-examination of my kid's father, which went through his bank statements of his weekly deposits ranging from $1,500 to $5,000, going all the way up to $12,000 a week or $15,000 a week. These were multiple individual deposits made through Venmo, PayPal, and cash deposits. We went through every single one of them, and every single one of them, he pretended to not know where and who the deposits were from. This is on record. This man perjured himself. Now, these deposits outline and are in direct correlation to the injuries that were available in our records, in the court filings. The pattern of bruisings bruising that showed up on my children. Not to mention that I had a witness that was a 20-year victims advocate for the Tukwila PD, and she specialized in organized child abuse. She said on record on the stand that all the evidence that she reviewed indicated that this man was exploiting the children, exploiting them for monetary gain. Their father has not had a job in 7 years. He's never been held to account for why he gets individual deposits that would outline and indicate very blatantly what crimes he's committing. Not to mention the fact that my children, after coming home from their father, remember, for the first 4 years of their life, they were seeing him for 8 hours. So any parent would be able to see the striking difference from their child leaving in a perfectly safe, happy, baseline state to coming home completely flatlined and then having night terrors for the following week. And also not eating. Now, CPS was heavily involved, and instead of having some kind of formal review of the evidence, I found out that after 2 years, none of the evidence was submitted on record. The 2 CPS agents who illegally oversaw our cases, who would close them without investigation. Mind you, there's never been an investigation against this man. In 2019, after the children reported that they had been taped up, that daddy was taping them up, they had 6 months earlier that they had also been seen, when asked about a thumb injury, they simulated getting on the ground, putting their hands behind their back and their feet up, being hogtied. When having a meeting at CPS in 2019 to discuss the fact that my children were talking about being taped up, their father gave a laughable storyline saying that he had found tape on some boxes and was putting them on their feet and making them laugh. My children were seen, and this is on video, screaming when seeing the tape. They found painter's tape in my garage at the time and said, "Daddy puts that on me." My son screamed, "No, Daddy, no, Daddy." That is not the response of a fun day with dad sticking tape on his feet. Their dad was also on the stand saying that I was the one with the duct tape, the variety of duct tape on my home. Most of what this man said on the stand was a variety of unchecked projection in the form that was so transparent that if there was any law that was being followed, or if there was any professional that had handled our case at any time, this man made himself so obvious. He could not even accuse me of anything authentic. He would recycle the things that were documented on record that had been proven that he was guilty of. He would simply just repeat those the next year and say that I was guilty. No, nothing this man has accused me of has ever gone anywhere. But CPS had, after that meeting, straight gunned for me. It was clear that I had a very clear, viable case and substantial evidence, which, doing some research, per case law, my case supersedes most cases in this state for the amount of evidence that I had. The CPS agents, Brenda Walker, which I'm sure you guys know, and I'm sure you have a great relationship with Brenda Walker and Tony Ricks, were responsible for repeated slander, false accusations, which they had taken straight from the boy's father, which was a straight projection of his guilt and his actions. They opened non-stop investigations against me after the meeting in the summer of 2019. Repeated investigations. They did no investigating, and instead, they called around all the professionals, baited them with questions where they could set it up to make me look like however they were trying to frame it. Unfortunately, they were not successful. And after 6 months of this, I started making reports to the ombudsman, and they had to stop because they were getting investigated. So I have had multiple investigations taken out on me. Never once has anything, not only have they not been substantiated, the investigation results countered directly what was being said about me. I was being accused of starving my kids because they wouldn't eat after they came home from their fathers because they were so traumatized. Mind you, these were little boys that were getting on top of each other, shoving the other one's head down in a pillow and calling each other my money makers. That's what I was witnessing in my sons. I have done nothing but pick myself up and continue to try to walk forward with my head up after 6 years of abusive litigation and $300,000 being so in debt and having my life so demolished that frankly I have nothing left. I have no relationships. I have barely anything to offer. Having my sons across the country with a man that I know is very dangerous. Not only is he dangerous, he used the abuse that I knew he was guilty of, and blatantly threw it in my face to control me. So much so that if I said or did anything, he would return them horrifically battered. And then he would use his means to make sure that he was covered. And if I said anything, I would receive a restraining order and filings against me. And if I didn't say anything, I would be positioned to be framed. Now, by the time they were in kindergarten, the only thing that I could do was take pictures of their injuries and document it in real time with a pastor at Quest Church and advocate at Seattle Ops. So there is 2 years worth of text messages of me documenting everything. I trusted them enough that they would not call CPS because CPS couldn't be trusted. Not even the Seattle CPS when I moved to Seattle when the boys were living with their father. I moved to Seattle to follow them there. This man he was in, I can't remember what it's called, but he broke our parenting orders literally every month, and not a single consequence would ever come from proving that he was in violation with our orders. He withheld them for 3 months after Christmas of 2020, 2020, when my son had horrific bruising all over his thighs and back, and was telling me that elves were coming in to his room at night and hurting him in the body. Essentially, he was telling me that he was being raped. I tried to find help for him, and as a result, they were taken from me for 3 months without consequence, illegally. The same thing happened later that summer when the other twin had been completely battered, including a double black eye and fingernail indents, huge scrapings on his back. And when asked about it, he screamed and ran and hid in the closet. Multiple witnesses saw the injuries on this child. And as I did every time, I called the nurse hotline and asked what to do and said I want this documented, but I'm in a position where every time I've tried to get help, somehow, no matter how obvious or the injuries are, I'm the one who ends up taking the blame and suffering the consequences for trying to get my kids help. Well, I was told by the nurse that if I didn't take them to the ER, that she would call CPS on me. So when I took them to the ER, the doctor acknowledged their injuries. I had a witness, and then simply did not write them in the notes. Or the version of the notes that their father got, because he filed a restraining order, even though the pediatrician had seen the injuries on the boys, saw the pictures, and wrote a note saying that these boys look like they're being abused. Their father refused to allow the pediatrician to see Nico. And then their father got away with, again, withholding them for 2 months and then forcing me into supervised visitation. I was allowed to pick my supervisor, but he withheld them until I went with the supervisor that he picked, a supervisor who committed fraud by altering the notes of the supervisors to make it the narrative look like I was baiting my children when they just outright said that their dad was hurting them. I had witnesses with me when my son just out of nowhere said, "Daddy hits me," in front of the supervisor. He also, the owner of the supervisor company altered the notes to make it look like when I took them to the doctor, because my son had a 5-month bloody sore on his penis, they made it seem like I was a pervert. The way that they wrote the notes, they would write the notes, they would slander me to the supervisors. And then when I would address the supervisors and tell them that I'm paying them, that they are a neutral party, and that they don't get to, intimidate, because they were using intimidation and following me and my children to the bathroom. I mean, it was horrific. The owner would change around their notes to make it look like the supervisor said that quote to me, and then wrote that I cried and said, "I'm just really sad." I mean, there's nothing that anyone can do when you can't prove that the supervisor was altering the notes. The problem with all of this is that I have a perfect memory. That's what's kept me through the last 8 years, that's kept me credible and has not allowed anybody to falsely diagnose me, is because I have a perfect memory. I remember everything to a detail. Maybe not exactly the dates, but I could go over our entire case over the last 8 years and give you every single detail of everything that's happened. And I would think that something is just so wrong if I didn't know that thousands upon thousands of parents have been in my position who have tried to protect their kids and had them taken for trying to protect them. So, in 2022, my apartment in Wedgwood in Seattle, there was a young man who moved across the courtyard who had constant alarms going off. He had some equipment on his window, what looked like a metal round tube. Come to find out, the metal round tube is something used to what's called war driving. It's to pick up the Wi-Fi of your neighbor. It was directed right at my apartment. Come to find that this person knew my kid's father and my kid's father's two best friends, Nelson and Leo, because his mother, who was quite unwell, would constantly be yelling out their names and telling everybody in the neighborhood that criminals are coming into her home at night, stealing her medication, and saying all kinds of crazy stuff. At the time, my kids were in kindergarten. They would come to my visits repeatedly just after they had been abused. So they would have fresh wounds and I would need to tend to their wounds, meaning having to wipe my 6-year-old's bottom for him because he couldn't do it because it was too painful, having to wipe the poop off his leg. Every weekend that I had them, having to care for my other son who would get so sick that he would throw up. I would try to get any kind of footage that I could of them trying to communicate what they were going through. The son that is more aggressive, he is an artist and he made a cardboard house. I sent a box for him and he painted it, and then he made some rooms inside and he made a bed for one of his clay figures. Well, I came out when he was showing me what he was doing. He had taped the arms of the clay figure down on the bed and the feet, and he had taken a wooden spoon that we got a wooden fork from PCC, took off one of the prongs and jimmied it to the neck of the clay figure that he made. And I asked him what he was doing, and he couldn't answer me. He just said, in fact, I can't remember, but I filmed it. And then as soon as I was done filming it, the footage disappeared. And this happened repeatedly every time I captured what was obviously a direct sign of horrific abuse that my children were suffering. Somehow, the footage would disappear in real time. So, in order to do that, someone would have to have remote control over your software. And to do that, you would have to be in close proximity. So putting 2 and 2 together, the man, his name is Cody, who lived across the courtyard, who had the metal thing on his window, war driving, which means they're picking up the Wi-Fi signal, jailbreaking the Wi-Fi, getting into every account that's signed on to the Wi-Fi, and then jailbreaking every account and device from there. After figuring this out and documenting it with the two people that I documented everything with, not really anything I could do. I made a few reports to the Seattle Police Department with legitimate claims. I also was having multiple break-ins and things that I'm not going to mention at this time. Horrific things that have happened to me. Instead of the police doing anything, they made and I don't know how they did this because it seems quite illegal. They decided that I was a chronic caller, essentially a hysterical caller. Even though one of the calls was I had gotten the records from children's when their father had taken my son to get a tox screen after he told everybody that I was poisoning my son. I got the records from that visit and had him in a backpack in my car because a key disappeared, and anything that I held in my house would disappear. So I kept a backpack in my car, and one night my car was broken into, and that backpack, not the computer in the back, not several other things that were of value were taken. No, the backpack with the medical records and other important documents was taken. When I made the police report, instead of the police looking at the broken window or hearing the neighbor who heard the conversation between two grown men who were the suspects, and I know who it was. It was my son's father and his friend Leo, or Nelson. Instead of taking all the details and the fact that the things that were taken were quite specific, or looking at or listening to me when I told them about how my house was broken into and there were literal fingerprints on the door and the wall next to the door, instead of even coming to my car, he told me that he would call my advocate and he would make the report. Well, he called my advocate and he told them that I was having a schizophrenic break. Because apparently that's what, people in your positions who have licenses that are officers of the law can do. They can just say whatever the fuck they want. So excuse me if I'm a little hesitant to want to come to your office and talk about what's happening because I haven't had the best experience. Now, if you're wondering of why all of these people are seeming to rally behind this man, well, we can go back to the two trials that we had where he submitted his bank documents. The bank documents are a direct and open record of the people who deposited those individual deposits of the $15,000 to $5,000 weekly deposits. Now there's a record of who is paying this man for whatever he's soliciting or offering. By way of my children's father submitting his bank records, mind you, 4 years, total, 4 years of it. That was, in my assertion, a direct blackmail move because all of those records are open. Family court records are public they're for public consumption. Now, it's quite funny that our two judges sealed everything because that's not normal. So the bank records that would indicate and give a direct, that would directly show who is paying this man for whatever service he's offering, happened to be sealed unlawfully by the two judges, who happened to side with a man despite overwhelming, conclusive, irrefutable evidence against him. Despite the fact that he perjured himself, and despite the fact that his second lawyer, I had actually interviewed, and she denied taking my case 2 years prior, or a year prior, because she said that she doesn't take cases against the lawyer that he had prior to her. So, in fact, the relocation trial is null and void. None of that really fucking matters when a bunch of people are doing their best to protect their actions, illegal, highly illegal actions, in the face of a woman who simply is relaying the evidence as it stands in its entirety, verbatim. So it seems like a lot of people have a lot to lose, and the people who are tied to those deposits in his account happen, in my assertion, to be people of high profiles and high means, because within months after my children were relocated across the country, I started experiencing overwhelming group stalking and harassment, finding that my phone was being interfered with by multiple people. And this is coming to my attention after recognizing patterns that had been happening for 2 years, 3 years prior to that, and finally putting it together that something isn't quite right, especially when the police department is involved in the harassment, or making sure that anything that I do and say is not heard, that I am silenced. And going beyond that, from that point, in October of 2023, my entire life has been decimated. There have been organized, formal smear campaigns so vigorous that I cannot get a job. The interference on my phone is so blatant that it happens in front of my face in real time, and they don't give a shit. I have the IP addresses of the people who are constantly remotely hacking me, mind you, being paid to do this. And if you haven't put this all together, submitting of bank records that would out the people who paid for the illegal services from my kid's father, that was a move of blackmail by him to rally these people to hire an organization, what's called a consulting firm, that hides under the guise of private investigators, that illegally carries out fraud and campaigns to dismantle, disrupt, and destroy anyone who gets in the way of the clients that are paying the ticket. So this is the background that we're dealing with here. And if you want to go ahead and look through the actual documents, not the garbage hearsay, the just like non-stop array of just whatever could be said to So this is part one. Part two will be the semantics of what's being used, how the surveillance and the stalking and the interference is being carried out, and the means, the platforms, the tools that are used to do it. Because I'm not going to come into your office and have somebody treat me like I don't know what I'm talking about, because they simply don't know what they're talking about, or don't have the education or the means or the understanding to sort out this level, this profound level of operation. And I don't mean to sound condescending, but I have been treated like utter shit by people who are supposed to protect me and my children. And I'm walking into this thinking that that's going to happen again, but I'm doing it because I don't have a choice. I need to get a job. I need to have a device I can use that is not constantly being interfered with. I cannot get text messages from my own family. I have to create a new email practically every month. I can't communicate with my children's school, because if I did, I would lose contact with them. And think about what could be said about me by their father if I had to use a new email every month to communicate with their teachers. People who are already given a whole fucking slew of bullshit about me, while they simultaneously ignore the fact that my children show overwhelming signs of pretty serious chronic abuse. Mind you, I'm not alleging anything here. I am simply relaying the details of the last fucking 8 years of my life. And all I want from this office, and again, sorry for my tone, I don't know you, and I don't know if anybody in your office is going to do right by me, let alone my children. I'm not asking for that. What I'm asking for is simply to help me have a phone and accounts associated to my devices that are not interfered with. I'm not even asking for an investigation. In fact, I'm privy to the fact that my kid's father is already being investigated by federal officers. I don't have any contact with them, and I don't have anything to do with the case. My concern right now is that I need to get a job. I need to support myself, so that if and when the time comes, my children are finally brought home to safety, I need to be able to support them and have devices that can be used, that aren't being used to commit fraud, to try to frame me for illegal activity. I tried to open a Minecraft account so I could play with my son. Immediately, someone else logged on and opened another account. With all the news about what's been happening through those forums, and on top of the fact that I have had multiple accounts opened, the phone died there. This was a bit long.
I have another audio that's about 15 minutes today. I think I'm going to record a more concise, logical breakdown of the mechanisms of the surveillance and coercive control with all of my devices, the platform that's used, the business model, what they're doing, why they're doing it. It's pretty layered. It's basically, in my mind, the way that I've understood it from what I've researched, it's three-pronged, and there's three different sort of platforms or modalities that are being used to maintain full control, meaning putting me on a fake internet, an internal network, having complete control over every device through the means of replacing local software with open source in the cloud software, using beta apps that can be malleable and store malicious code in them, using a clone phone to sync with the device, essentially giving my device a false front, and putting me under, in addition to all that, putting me under a MDM, which is similar to a parental control contract. So on my phone, the things that I cannot do, I can't upload any apps. I don't have any apps on there, although in the background you can see that Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok are all in the background on my phone. Not being used by me, I can't even access them. I basically can search on the web, but the web is in a cloud. It's a network, just like corporations, like say Starbucks, for instance, has a local internal network that they use for their corporations so people can communicate with each other in a secure way. The same thing is happening in my case. And I know that sounds extreme. It's not extreme when you understand, I think, the implications that are at hand and what stakes are at hand, because people don't go to these lengths. People don't spend this kind of money for 24/7 surveillance if there wasn't something or someone who holds a key to being able to essentially pull down a web of criminal entities. My case has attached so many people to it. And that's by proxy of the primary abuser and his network and his ability to find the right people who can work the racket. And we are all clear that there's a racket in family court. That's not up for debate. And if anybody wants to challenge me on that, I'd be happy to tell you the statistics. In fact, I will upload some audio of a woman talking about the very statistics of family court and the 80% rate of parental parents getting their children removed from them when trying to protect them from the other parent. With, most of the time, with profound forensic evidence. Even video of the parent harming the children. That's how bad it is. 80%. And it's not always women. Seems to me, from what I can gather, if you know somebody, if you have the means and the money, that's who's going to win in family court. Because if there's no oversight, there's no checks and balances, there's no jury, and if the lawyers are chumming up to so-and-so and so-and-so, they can work out a schedule, which is what I observed, and get trials to go under certain judges at certain times. I mean, I watched this stuff roll out like it was, they didn't care. They didn't give a shit that I watched them commit blatant fraud in front of my face the entire time. In fact, our trials were simply just humiliation rituals. They were so pathetic and laughable. Having a man who suffers from cluster B malignant psychopathology. That is a man with an emotional maturity of that of younger than 12 years old. He was on the stand. They let him on the stand for 3 hours while he bragged about himself. Most of it was an exact opposite of who he is, alongside simply role reversing and plagiarizing who I am as a parent. And then on top of that, he would then project literally everything he's done and he's been accused of onto me in a way that's so profoundly transparent that it occurred to me that everybody that has been part of our case is part of this fraud, because there's no way that anybody who had witnessed my 2 trials would think that there's not something profoundly wrong going on. I mean, I would have to assume that the judge and the lawyers all had IQs of teenagers between their high school and college years, out drinking, partying, shimmying up with the best friends. The logic was unbelievable. It was a campaign to shit on me for 4 hours, and not a single thing that man said had any relevance, had any reference to who I am, number one, to anything I've done, number two, not a single time, place, or characteristic that anybody can identify that is in a relation to me. It was a straight up made up person, a trope that they created and cherry picked, a few things that I had said in the past and developed this like monster, fictional, blatantly, obviously fictional monster that they could demonize, so much so that no one would have time to think about the hundreds of bruises. Because if you don't bring it up, if you don't have time to bring it up, if you're only given, I was given 20 minutes on the stand. 20 minutes to basically defend myself against just outright blatant lies. And I can go through that later, but I just had to go on a little rant. I wish that I had access to those transcripts. They're $25,000. I would publish them just to show how blatant this kind of fraud is. Because no one in there was thinking that anything that was going on was legitimate or abiding by some kind of rule of thumb that would do best by the children. No, it was a show. It was a premeditated, pre-thought of charade. One where a narcissist got to wear his crown, except for he forgot his clothes. And it was goddamn obvious.